Hi, welcome back to Malone Hatley's podcast, I Now Pronounce You Divorced, where we discuss items and issues that are currently happening with some of our own situations and items and issues that may be of interest to others who are tuning in for the first time. Today, we have a special guest with us who appeared a few episodes ago, Chris Beck. Welcome back from Soberlink.
Thanks for having me again. Appreciate it.
Sure. And for those who are just tuning in, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, so my name's Chris Beck. I'm the Vice President of Business Development for Family Law. I work for Soberlink. We do alcohol monitoring for child custody cases where one or both the parents have been accused of abusing alcohol, and there's a nexus between that parent's alcohol use and the safety of that kiddo.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Since the last time that you were on here, has there been any updates or anything new with the technology or the research within your company?
Yeah, I think we're really excited to announce that we've gone to a rental model with our device options. Instead of having that upfront, I guess, barrier to entry of that high price point of our devices in the past, where clients were paying upwards to $750 to get started with our program, we now rolled it into the monthly plan, and you're seeing device rentals as low as $19 a month. Much more affordable, eliminating that barrier of entry, and now it's all billed in arrears.
Wow. So I feel like as soon as someone hears the name Soberlink, they're thinking like DUI, right? Like that's kind of what the media shows is in movies or shows or something. Somebody has to get in the car, they have to blow in the thing. There's usually a joke like they try and have somebody else do it for them or something like that. But it's really y'all's services expand so far beyond just like only DUI cases, right? Or only alcohol abuse charges or criminal events.
You're absolutely right. We actually focus in family law. That's our biggest market. That's where, you know, the bulk of all of our business comes from. Clients that are struggling with their alcohol use and they're going through a separation or divorce and they're trying to figure out how to co-parent while managing their, I guess, for lack of a better word, poor relationship with alcohol, right?
In your experience, how do you prevent kind of tampering with the device? Because I know a lot are who are listening probably think, okay, there's got to be a way to get around this somehow. How is this really helpful?
Yeah, well, I would say that this is where we spend the bulk of our dollars when it comes to making sure that each and every result is reliable and that, we can be assured that it is that particular person taking the test. So we have a few different things. It starts with our facial recognition software that we built into the system. So we have a closed system where the facial rec is part of the actual breathalyzer. So we can be assured that it is the client that's supposed to be taking the test, right? And then we have tamper detection technology inside the device to ensure that someone's not trying to quote unquote game the system. We see that a lot where, someone's trying to force fake air into the device to pretend it's them taking the test. And we can actually, with our internal tamper detection, distinguish between human breath and that of artificial air. So that's really something that separates us from some of the other competitors that are out there.
So, as far as proving all this in court, how does SoberLink support litigation efforts, or how can somebody rely on this device and go into court and introduce it and say, look, they weren't sober or they were sober? How does that kind of work?
Yeah. So what usually happens is that the attorneys will write into us and try to get certified records of their clients' testing. So they would contact our compliance team at compliance@soberlink.com, and then they would ask for certified records. And this would come with a signed affidavit from our custodian of record. And that way you can get those records admissible into court, and then you can build your case that way.
What are some of the best practices that you communicate with your clients as far as how to deal with the results, how to share the results, and things like that?
Yeah. So best practices is a big part of what we're doing now. We actually have a education initiative that we're trying to get in front of as many law firms as possible to talk about these best practices because we want to remind everyone that we want to be an empowerment tool for these individuals that are struggling with alcohol use disorder or even just, their ability to, drink responsibly, maybe you could say. So really, when it comes to best practices, we're trying to figure out what fits the situation best. And we have two different programs that we offer. One's around parenting time only, and the other one is testing daily. So our level one program, testing only around that parenting time, would be okay, let's take a test prior to the parenting time happening to ensure that we know this parenting time is going to happen. Because if they test non compliant, we can then, suspend that parenting time if that's the case. Because remember, we're testing the individual's alcohol in real time. So now we know that person is sober, ready to do the exchange of the kiddos. And then they test a couple times during their parenting time. And then I like to test after the parenting time period. So you have documented sobriety during that entire parenting time. Our level two program is more of the treatment model where we're trying to add a lot of structure to the program. So, they're taking tests on a schedule. And typically this happens 2 to 4 times per day. So at a minimum, someone should be, I'm using this program as let's take a test when we wake and then before we go to bed. One of the big things that we recommend from a best practice standpoint is don't allow more than 10 hours in between that evening and morning test. If you exceed that, that's where people can start to maybe drink in a way that might be irresponsible and then also eliminate the alcohol in time for their next test. And that's not what we want to see. So 10 hours is what we recommend as best practice. But if it's two, or let's say you go to three tests, or maybe four, what we'll do is we'll put that middle test in between the two tests so that every test is evenly spaced out. So whether it's 3 or 4, we know that you have a certain amount of time that is in between each of those tests. But remember, the test when you wake up and the test when you go to sleep, those are the two most important tests that I always say need to be spot on, right? Yeah.
Is there anything that could make somebody accidentally test positive if they weren't drinking? Is it true, like if you've used mouthwash or if you've I don't know, eaten something in particular that it would
Yeah. Yeah.
like a false positive? And does that happen a lot?
Boy, I hate the word false positive, but I understand that's kind of the nomenclature that's out there. We like to call them incidental exposures to alcohol. All right. So that's really important because really it was just an incidental exposure to alcohol, like in what you were saying there. Listerine is a good example. It contains alcohol. If someone doesn't, think about our testing protocol, which says don't eat, drink, uh, vape, smoke 20 to, 10, I guess it's 10 to 20 minutes prior to testing. If they don't follow those rules, this particular example could create a positive. So let's say I'm in a hurry in the morning. I rinse my mouth with Listerine. It has alcohol in it. I take a test immediately after. It will have a positive. But what's unique about Soberlink is that we have a retest cycle. And this is super important because we're here to protect that client. Also, because we know days get busy. We know that people are in rushes and sometimes forget to honor these deprivation periods in the testing protocol. So we have a retest cycle. So we'll actually lock that person out from testing for 15 minutes because we want to verify and confirm that first initial positive. So after 15 minutes, the client will get a text message, and that text message will say, hey, it's time to retest. And if they retest compliant, that entire event is seen as a compliant test. So that would be an example of incidental exposure to alcohol, because in the research, it suggests that after 2 to 3 minutes, that incidental exposure to alcohol that's in the mouth cavity will dissipate. All right. And we lock out for 15 minutes. So we give ample time for that customer, that client to actually rinse their mouth out and comply. So, I think this is a great thing that Soberlink offers. And it's just like any other test. Like if you were going to get a test at a lab and let's say you're testing for cocaine, this would be the same thing. If you tested positive, the MRO would go back and actually retest that sample to ensure that it wasn't a false positive. So we're doing the same thing with breath testing. I think that's an important achievement that we've been able to do and a protocol that we have in place to help those individuals.
Wow, that's wonderful. That's good that you allow that to happen.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
As you're talking, I'm thinking, this is good because hard to believe we're entering into that holiday season. And I know a lot of clients and individuals will be wanting to celebrate and concerned if they're going to have those positive results. So what are some of the struggles, or I guess I'd say struggles and concerns you have as we enter the holidays? And again, you give such great advice from best practices during the holidays too.
Yeah. Well, I guess it depends where you're at in your journey, right? And when it comes to the holidays, if you're in recovery, you've gone to some type of treatment facility and you're using Soberlink to help maintain your sobriety, after that process, I would recommend when we enter into the holidays, maybe it might be a good idea to try to attend parties which are dry. Maybe there's no alcohol present at these parties. And I would even, I was given the advice once, don't be afraid to leave early. If there is alcohol there and it is tempting, you make a case where you show up, you do all the things that you need to do to greet the people that you know there, and then go ahead and you can leave early. Don't feel like you're hurting people's feelings if you're leaving early. You're trying to maintain your sobriety, and that's the most important thing in front of you right now. So that is something that I also recommend. And probably the third thing is bring your SoberLink device. It can be used as an empowerment tool at any time. And just to reconfirm that, you are staying sober. And sometimes you need that little extra something to say, hey, I'm doing a good job right now and I am staying to my program. And when you get that compliant result that says I am not drinking, that's powerful.
So I feel like it's always harder on everybody else around the person, right? To try and figure out what their new rules are, what their restrictions might be. And one time I saw a story where this woman made a friend with someone who was recovering, and she wanted to throw her a birthday party or something, and knew she was a recovering alcoholic. And in setting up her party, she said, "Oh, well, I'll only put out beer and wine then. I won't put out any hard liquor." And like had a complete misunderstanding of what it meant to be sober. What would be some tips for like the friends and family and others going into this season? How can they help support someone who's newly getting sober or trying to reinforce their sobriety through the holidays?
Sure, sure. I do think, that you need to think about having a dry situation where there is no alcohol, beer or wine or
Right.
hard liquor present at the party. But if that's not the case, maybe there might be some. I would say let's keep things moving so where there's things to do and planned activities. That also helps. Where there's not a lot of downtime or awkward times. I once had a gentleman say that I went to a party and I was kept so busy I forgot that, you know, typically I would look for a drink, but if I'm keeping, busy during the time, I didn't have that thought anymore. And I thought that was interesting. So maybe activities and games, that you can have planned to keep the party moving forward. That's always important as a as the planner part of it, right? The
Right.
planning, maybe.
What advice would you offer to parents who are trying to co-parent during these holidays and want to keep it as stress-free as possible?
Yeah, I really think it goes right back to that. You're trying to co-parent in a situation and you know that it's going to be difficult. If you're the concerned party, meaning you're on the receiving side of the results, you know, just be mindful that, that this parent is doing their best and they are, trying to stay with the program and know that, it's not easy for them. And I guess, have empathy as well. I think that's important in this whole dynamic. We're expecting perfection in a lot of cases, but maybe it's not going to be perfect. And there might be some bumps in the road. I think being aware of that and being knowledgeable of that and what to do if there is a bump in the road, that's where I think it really makes the difference and having an open conversation. I love, what SoberLink does and the fact that it allows for that transparency. And that really brings a lot of ability to bring conversation into this whole dynamic.
Do you see a lot of situations where someone is voluntarily signing up for your program because they're trying to basically prove they don't have a problem versus having it mandated because there is evidence of a problem? How frequently do you see that?
Yeah, I see it being pretty frequent. There's a lot of cases where there's allegations of abusive drinking. And, when we see that, we're just trying to, put our best foot forward. And using SoberLink is a great way to help people, prove that they don't have an issue or, the problem that the other party is actually stating. And we have a program in both of our levels, level 1 and level 2, but it's a basic program where I see a lot of attorneys will actually do this as preemptive to going to court. So they'll actually have their client test for 6 months and test, 3 to 4 times per day and be able to put those records into court once court happens, 6 months later or whatnot, and try to just, get that particular part of the conversation squashed and say, hey, look, this is not an issue. We have compliant behavior for the last 6 months when it comes to drinking. There might be allegations that you'll hear in the testimonies of others, but this is the data and this is what we're being shown now. So getting out ahead of it, I think, is really important if there are some false allegations out there. And don't be afraid to use the technology because it is empowering. Once you have that data, you have it and it's yours forever. That's great.
Everyone loves to hear success stories. We're coming up on time. So maybe if we could close it out by just giving one or two success stories on how Soberlink helped navigate through the holidays, and then maybe one how Soberlink helped navigate through some pretty tough custody battles.
Yeah. Well, I think I can explain maybe one that's a combination of those both because I think with one comes the other, right? And, I remember hearing a story where they were navigating through the holidays and there was a lot of concern from the co parent who was on the receiving side. And what the monitor client agreed to was, hey, I'll take some additional tests. And I thought that was really mindful of that individual because, they were only testing 2 times per day, but they were entering a season, the holidays, and a time period in which drinking elevated in history. So they were both mindful of that. And by adding some additional tests during the days through the holiday season when they were apart instead of being together, really helped with the conversation, really helped with the ease and peace of mind that that other co-parent had. I always say that when these parents divorce or get separated, their natural monitoring is gone now because the other parent was their monitoring system. And when they're gone, SoberLink is kind of that replacement. And this is where now this technology can be used to empower them to say, hey, look, I am keeping it together. I am staying sober. And you can trust me now because it's real data. It's not just me saying that I'm staying sober.
Thank you so much for the information you've given us has been very helpful. And I'm sure those who are tuning in and listening thought the same thing. If anyone needs to reach out to you, what's the best way and how do they do that?
Yeah. So the best way is to go to our website at www.soberlink.com. If you're ever interested in talking to a business development representative like myself, and you're an attorney and want more information, maybe even a lunch and learn, you can reach out to family law at soberlink.com.
Well, thank you. And thank you to those who are tuning in. Please continue to submit questions to us. We really try our best to answer those on these podcasts. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and give us a 5-star rating. We really do appreciate that. And this is Malone Hatley's podcast. I now pronounce you divorced. Thank you.